All right. Hi. This is going to be my first story that I'm going to share with you tonight, and I wanted to talk tonight. We're going to be switching here between computers because I've got a couple things I want to show you. Tonight I wanted to talk about one of my ancestors, and as you can see, I'm not quite ready. This is actually my great-great-great-grandfather, and his name was Olus Johnson from Norway. And this is a story that is actually taken out of a book that was written by John A. Widtsoe, who was an apostle of the church, and it is a story about primarily his mother, and it's called In the Gospel Net. And in that book, it talks about how John A. Widtsoe's mother was converted to the church. And that story takes place in Norway, and it deals with my great-great-great-grandfather, Olus Johnson. Now, I actually have a picture of Olus here. This is off of the Family Search website, and I'm going to try and do my best to hold this up. This is Olus Johnson. He was born in Norway, as I said, and I think he actually died and is buried up in Cache Valley, and that's kind of a neat thing. So this is a picture of Olus, and if you look on FamilySearch.com under his name, you'll see I think a couple different variations of this same picture. Don't know exactly when it was taken. Maybe you can find that out, but this is the story I want to tell you tonight about Olus Johnson. So with that, let's begin. All right. So you can excuse me because I'm going to read some of this, and I'll do my best to keep your interests here. Now, John A. Widtsoe, as I mentioned, he wrote the book, and it's about the conversion of his mother. His mother's name was Anna, and I'll just start this off. It says, "The story of Anna Widtsoe is one of a seeker after truth who, tossed by the waves of mysterious fate, was caught by the gospel net and carried into a far country, America, where, through the possession of eternal truth, though amidst much diversity, she and her family found unbounded happiness." Now, the fact that Anna Widtsoe came to the knowledge of the gospel through my great-great-great-grandfather is pretty good. I will say I am not to be given credit for that little introduction. That was also written by one of Olus Johnson's relatives, and I don't have a citation for that. But out of the book, In the Gospel Net, there's a chapter in there that's called "The Shoemaker Bears His Testimony," and this is the story. Anna Widtsoe had arrived in Trondheim, Norway, and rented an apartment for herself and her two boys. One day she asked a neighbor, a ship's captain living in the same house, to recommend a shoemaker to whom she might take her son's shoes for repair. Olus Johnson, a very competent, honest workman, was recommended. In fact, the shoemaker's son Arndt brought to the house a pair of the captain's shoes and took with him for repair a pair of John's shoes. John is John A. Widtsoe. When the boys' shoes were returned, a Mormon tract was stuffed into each shoe. A tract is like a pamphlet. It's like the things the missionaries give out, so just a little brochure. Don't know what it was. Joseph Smith, The Restoration of the Gospel, not really sure. But inside of each of John A. Widtsoe, he was a little boy, inside of each one of his shoes, Olus Johnson stuck a little pamphlet about the church. Okay? A little later, with a parcel containing another pair of old shoes, the widow, Anna Widtsoe, set forth in the warm sunshine in the spring of 1879 for a half-hour walk to Johnson's shoemaker shop. It certainly did not occur to her that she was making the most fateful visit of her life. Yet who can that it was the most faithful? The events of life are like the threads of a tapestry. All together, they make the pattern and the picture. Ollis Johnson was a wholesome, well-spoken man in his 40s, a workman who knew his craft. His wife was of the sturdy Norwegian type. Anna Widsoe first met the wife and made inquiry about the meaning of the tracks found in her son's shoes that had been returned repaired. Mrs. Johnson declared that they told the truth, and that Mr. Johnson would explain the whole matter. The shoemaker agreed to put soles on the shoes strong enough to last a good while, even under the wear of a lively, active lad who was always moving about. The details of the business were soon agreed upon. The commonplaces of courteous people were exchanged, and the widow was about to leave the shop. Yet a little curious about the tracks which he had found in the first pair of shoes when they were returned, but unwilling to ask too many questions. Anna Widsoe's hand was on the door latch when the shoemaker said, somewhat hesitantly, for the business was concluded and the lady was a stranger, "You may be surprised to hear me say that I can give you something of more value than the soles for your shoes, the soles for your child's shoes." She was surprised. She looked into the eyes of the man, who stood straight and courageous in his shop. "Can you, a shoemaker, give me better than soles for my son's shoes? You speak in riddles," she answered. The shoemaker did not hesitate. "If you will but listen, I can teach you the Lord's true plan for salvation for his children. I can teach you how to find happiness in this life and to prepare for eternal life in the life to come. Prepare for eternal joy in the life to come. I can tell you whence you came, why you are upon the earth, and where you will go after death. I can teach you, as you have never known it before, the love of God for his children on earth." Understanding, happiness, joy, love, the words with which she was wrestling. But this was a shoemaker shop. This man was clearly a humble man who knew little of the wisdom of schools and churches. She felt confused. She simply asked, "Who are you?" "I am a member of the Church of Christ. We are called Mormons. We have the truth of God." Mormons. It was terrible. She had innocently walked into a dangerous place. Hurriedly, she thanked the shoemaker and left the shop and climbed the hill. Yet, as she walked homeward, the words of the shoemaker rang in her ears, and she remembered a certain power in his voice and majesty in his bearing when he delivered his message and bore his testimony. He was a shoemaker, but no ordinary man. Could it be that the Mormons had the truth of the Lord? No, it was absurd. But it made her thoughtful and restless. When the repaired shoes were brought to the house a day or two later, the shoemaker's young son, Arndt Johnson, Anna Widsoe found, carefully tucked into each shoe, different Mormon tracks. She now had 4 of them. Okay? The shoemaker was valiant. He missed no opportunity to fulfill his obligation of a Latter-day Saint, to bear witness modestly and properly, but steadily, to the world. The tracks in the shoes aroused her curiosity to the extent that one Sunday she went to a Mormon meeting. The meeting room was on the 2nd floor of the shoemaker's home, a sturdy log house. I don't think I ever understood that before. That's kind of fascinating. They held church in Ollis Johnson's house. A small group of people were there, and a fiery speaker, a missionary, raised all manner of questions in her mind. The main effect of that meeting was a resentment against the primitive environment of the meeting. Very humble people constituted the membership of the Trondheim branch. Foolish class distinctions were sharply drawn in the land. To join such a group as she saw there that Sunday seemed to her tradition-bound mind to be a step downward. Had she understood the gospel, such distinctions would have been meaningless. One day, some months later, when the truth was forcing itself upon her, she came home, stood quietly in the middle of the floor, and said aloud to herself, Must I step down to that? Yes, if it is the truth, I must do so. Soon, however, all else was forgotten in her battles with the shoemaker and the missionary upon points of doctrine. She knew the Bible. Time upon time she came prepared to vanquish the elders, only to meet defeat herself. She had not read the Bible as these men did. Gradually she began to comprehend that her reading had been colored and overshadowed by the teachings of the church of her childhood, and that these men, these Mormon missionaries, accepted the Bible in a truer, more literal manner. She liked it. Nevertheless, she fought fearlessly, but it was no use. At length she had to admit that the Bible was all on the side of the Mormons. Even then she was not ready. There were other matters to be settled. Questions of authority, revelation, life within the church, and 100 others that her quick mind formulated were presented to the missionaries, debated, discussed, and taken up again. She had a worthy teacher and a missionary then in Trondheim, Elder Anthony L. Skanchi, whose knowledge of the gospel was extensive and sound, and whose wisdom in leading inquirers to truth was unusually fine. This well-informed, intelligent widow tested his powers. Upon here he directed the full battery of gospel evidence. Unwillingly, yet prayerfully, she became convinced that she was in the presence of eternal truth. At length, on April 1st of 1881, a little more than 2 years after she had first heard the gospel from the shoemaker, Ollis Johnson, she was baptized into the church by Elder Anthony L. Skanchi. The water was icy cold, but she declared to her dying day that never in all her life had she felt so warm and comfortable. The fire within was kindled, never to be extinguished. The humble people of the branch became her brethren and sisters. So that's the story of the shoemaker who bore his testimony. I did some research and found later on that because of joining the church, Anna Whitsoe was actually basically forced out of Norway. She was told that she would lose a lot of her benefits because she was a widow. Because of joining the church, essentially she was forced to leave Norway and join the saints in Utah. And of course, if you ever want some interesting reading, you can read about some of the work that John A. Whitsoe did as an apostle of the church, and even before that, in the areas of agriculture. He was quite an accomplished farmer and developed a lot of techniques and was quite well known and recognized throughout the world for some of his agriculture research, and it's quite a fascinating story. So take that as a good lesson and a good example of somebody in our history, our family history, who was a wonderful missionary and who laid out that gospel net that was able to catch Anna Whitsoe. And hope you enjoyed that, and we'll talk to you again next time. Bye-bye.